Hello, my name is Patrina van Nieuwstad and I am the co-chair of Summit Studies at the G7 Research Group. On the 15th of June in Kananaskis, Canada, G7 members met and made 149 commitments in response to ongoing geopolitical instability, advances in AI, and environmental pressures. These 149 commitments marked a shift from the traditional G7 commitment structure, with 68% fewer commitments than the Apulia Summit and 77 fewer than the Hiroshima Summit. That said, 6 key documents were produced covering topics from critical minerals, wildfires, AI and quantum technologies, and transnational challenges. Nearly half of the commitments made at Kananaskis focused on the digital economy. Leaders also addressed environmental pressures through commitments on biodiversity and wildfire mitigation, while placing increased emphasis on critical minerals and transnational repression as emerging areas of concern. From these commitments, we selected 20 priority commitments to monitor this year for compliance, where we would give each country a score from -1, 0 to +1. This selection includes 6 commitments on the digital economy and 4 commitments on the environment, as well as 2 commitments each on regional security, development, migration, and transnational repression, and 1 on critical mineral trade markets and infrastructure. Our interim report in January, the average compliance with Kananaskis commitments were 75%. Since then, the score has increased to 80%. Our research is all based on publicly available information, documentation, and media reports of actions such as policy announcements or funding allocations made by G7 members between June 18th, 2025 and June 1st, 2026. With regards to the overall performance of each member, the European Union leads the G7 for 2025 at 95%, followed by Canada at 93% and the UK at 90%. Germany and Italy both have 78%, while France and the United States have 73% and Japan at 65%. Now my team will brief the performance of the different areas of the commitments that we've monitored this year.
Hello, my name is Rafael Bitter. I'm a compliance director overseeing commitments pertaining to the digital economy and digital transformation for the G7 Research Group. As our co-chair of Summit Studies has stated previously, the global average across all 20 priority commitments for this cycle since Kananaskis has been of 80% exactly. Now, while this is a very strong performance, despite the slight drop from Kananaskis' score of 94%, the average for the commitments pertaining to digital economy averaged much higher, 14% so, with a final score of 94%. Contributing to this are several commitments, notably AI integration in small and medium enterprises, AI and quantum technology investments, in particular with correspondents in the Global South, as well as conscious efforts from G7 leaders to close digital divides. These 3 aforementioned commitments scored 88%, 100% and 94% respectively. One notable country that participated in this increase and this strong performance has been Italy, with a large increase in activity in the digital realm as opposed to previous cycles. One thinks notably of investment initiatives with the Global South and Africa, as is in line as well with their domestic plans, such as the MATE plan. The trend that we have observed in the past 4 cycles is that year on year, more and more commitments are being made by G7 leaders towards the digital realm and the digital economy. We expect this trend to continue, as is evidenced and hinted at by the presence of several leaders of the tech world and the quantum investment firms that are present and set to meet with G7 leaders later this week.
Hello, my name is Analia Rambula and I am an editor overseeing the commitments of AI, quantum technologies, communication security, and digital transformation. As Rafael mentioned, digital economy performance for this cycle was highly favorable. In terms of data and communication security, compliance was assessed on G7 members' efforts to protect digital data and communications networks from threats emerging in the quantum field. Building on the efforts to bridge digital divides, the commitment of workforce development for women and underrepresented communities evaluated actions supporting initiatives that ensure that vulnerable populations develop the necessary skills so that labor markets adapt to emerging technologies. Lastly, the commitment of AI-enhanced energy supply chains oversaw actions that address the use of AI to ensure security, resilience, and affordability of energy systems and supply chains. These three commitments scored a compliance of 88%, which, although lower than the digital economy related scores from the Apolia cycle, still represent significant efforts with mostly tangible results.
Hello, my name is 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐚𝐬𝐤𝐢𝐬 and I'm an editor with the G7 Research Group focusing on environment and climate related commitments. Average compliance across these areas was 78.25%. First, in 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐚𝐬𝐤𝐢𝐬, G7 members committed to supporting biological diversity and restoring nature. Compliance in this area was actually 100%. In order to reach compliance, members had to take action in both diversity and nature restoration. Canada's Force of Nature strategy to protect nature is an excellent example in this area, creating 35 new protected areas, spanning 1.6 million square kilometers of land and up to 700,000 square kilometers of oceans. Members all took balanced action between marine and land ecosystems, including targeting vulnerable ecosystems such as wetlands and peatlands. Second, G7 members produced the 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐚𝐬𝐢𝐬 Wildfire Charter last summit, boosting international cooperation to prevent and mitigate wildfires in response to an unprecedented fire season. Our compliance standard required actions in both adaptation and mitigation across communities, buildings, and infrastructure, grounded in both scientific research and local knowledge per the commitment that they made. Compliance in this area was 69%, with only Canada, the US, and the EU complying fully. The EU successfully balanced the commitment areas by combining targeted local firefighting support with cross-jurisdictional mitigation funding and ecosystem-focused strategic planning. Third, likewise, following the 𝐊𝐴𝐴𝐧𝐚𝐬𝐢𝐬 Charter, G7 members targeted efforts towards enhancing their shared capacity to mitigate and respond to the impacts of wildfire exposure on human health. In this area, we focused compliance on actions that address the shared capacity component in both mitigation and response. Commitment here was also 69%, with the UK, Italy, and the EU complying fully. The UK's Health Security Partnership Programme with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is an excellent example. This is a partnership focusing on strengthening Southeast Asia's capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to health threats, including wildfires and other climate health risks, through grants and expert partnerships between UK and Asian institutions. Finally, G7 members committed to halting and reversing deforestation and land degradation globally. Compliance required members to take action towards halting and reversing in both areas, and we assessed their compliance against the 2030 timeline they agreed to. Compliance in this area was 75%, with Canada, Germany, the UK, and the EU all reaching full compliance, and the rest complying partially. Germany stands out here, pledging $1 billion over 10 years to Tropical Forest Forever, leveraging public-private partnerships to support local efforts to address deforestation. And 20% of this funding is going to Indigenous-led projects. Notably, the 𝐊𝐴𝐴𝐧𝐚𝐬𝐢𝐬 Summit did not produce any commitments relating to or mentioning climate change or carbon emissions. Thanks.
Hello, my name is 𝐊𝐴𝐴𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐬 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐬 and I am a lead analyst at the G7 Research Group. So across all commitments this year, we had an average compliance come in at 0.61 or 80%. Today, I want to walk through 3 of those commitments, 2 of them in development and 1 of them in infrastructure, all 3 of them telling a very different story indeed. The first one is that of critical minerals. At 𝐊𝐴𝐴𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐬, leaders launched a new critical minerals action plan, committing to support responsible critical minerals projects. Now, this was both through direct partnerships with other organizations and also by promoting certain private sector investment. Compliance here was very strong, an average of 0.63 or 81%. 5 members, notably Canada, Germany, the UK, the US, and the EU, complied fully in this respect. Canada is in fact a good example here. It signed new mining partnerships abroad, including an agreement with Peru, and it backed projects at home, among them a Canada Growth Fund investment in a flagship mine, graphite mine in Quebec. There was action taken both with partnerships and with private capital in this regard. France, Italy, and Japan landed partial compliance, being active on the policy side, but without much concrete action in both dimensions to earn a full score in this commitment. The next is debt. With debt, the picture gets far harder. The commitment was to support countries facing debt challenges and including near-term liquidity pressures. This was the weakest of the three commitments, with an average of just 0.13 or 56%. Only Canada and Japan over here complied fully, putting real money and guarantees behind the commitment. Japan, for instance, through concrete financing from its development bank. There were 5 members managed only partial compliance, and the United States was in fact the only member in any of these three commitments to score -1. Washington repeatedly called for much stronger burden sharing in debt restructuring, but didn't actually put forward any concrete federal tools for debt relief, restructuring, or indeed liquidity support, and abstained on a key UN debt sustainability resolution recently as well. And last but not least is quality infrastructure. And here, this was the best result possible, quite frankly. We had every single member who fully complied, perfect score of 100%. Commitment was to keep working with emerging markets and developing country partners to build quality infrastructure, in particular economic corridors. The engine behind it is the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, with headlines target to mobilize over $600 billion by 2027. Here, the members delivered through their own flagship vehicles. In the EU, of course, we have the Global Gateways project. Italy had the Mattei plan for Africa and joint projects like the Lobito corridor. There was clear commitment and delivery across the board for this commitment. And so here the commitments were strong on critical minerals, near perfect on infrastructure, but a real shortfall on debt, driven largely by a lack of concrete support by the United States. Taken together, there is a pattern that is worth noticing in that the G7 does seem to follow through strongest when there's an established financial vehicle to carry it forward, and weakest when members are left to act on their own. Thank you.
Hello, my name is 𝐊𝐚𝐧𝐚𝐬𝐤𝐢𝐬 Compliance Director at the G7 Research Group, overseeing 2 democracy commitments regarding transnational repression. In today's briefing, I'll be covering these 2 commitments as well as the trade commitment on standard-based critical mineral markets. First, the commitment to foster a common understanding of transnational repression includes 3 dimensions. Firstly, shared awareness among G7 members and partners. Secondly, societal awareness. And thirdly, accountability for the acts of transnational repression. Compliance averaged 56%, with members often issuing multilateral statements and condemning acts of transnational repression. However, few established national frameworks and awareness efforts. Notably, Canada, the UK, the US, and EU achieved full compliance by creating legal definitions and reporting mechanisms. Turning to combating transnational repression, this commitment is assessed on support for those who are targets of transnational repression, support for civil society, and solidarity with affected states. This commitment is recorded a higher compliance of 75%, with the same 4 members achieving full compliance through concrete actions such as funding initiatives and protective measures for dissidents. Lastly, the commitment to develop standard-based critical mineral markets saw the lowest compliance of 31%. While most members pursued bilateral steps, few engaged the broader range of stakeholders required, such as Indigenous peoples and civil society. Although Canada published a roadmap, it still falls short of fulfilling full compliance due to the limited partner engagement. Work remains to be done towards both establishing a more concrete collective understanding of transnational repression, as well as standard-based critical mineral markets with both domestic and international partner engagement. Thank you.
Hello again. Our last 2 areas have a strong legacy at the G7. In our report, we have 2 commitments focused on regional security. The first followed the G7 members' commitments to peace and stability in the Middle East. And towards the end of our cycle, this focused especially on contexts involving Israel and Iran. This commitment received an overall score of 81%, which was a 13% decline from our interim report in January, as we saw the United States take actions antithetical to the commitment, namely the beginning of President Trump's war on Iran. This resulted in the United States receiving a -1 score. Other than Japan, which scored 0, all other G7 members scored a +1, undergoing action ranging from advocating for negotiations, funding aid, limiting escalation, and safeguarding regional stability between Israel and Iran especially. The second commitment within regional security focused on G7 members' commitment to explore all options to maximize pressure on Russia. These 3 areas that we focused on for this commitment were diplomatic, economic, and coercive measures to pressure Russia. Actions across these 3 spheres should aim to increase the costs of war, making continued Russian aggression costlier economically, diplomatically, and militarily. This commitment also received an overall score of 81%, with the United States of America also receiving a score of -1, Japan with a score of 0, and Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the UK and the EU with a score of +1. Another area we looked at is migration and refugees. Within this area, G7 leaders made 2 specific commitments, one on enhancing border management and one on dismantling transnational organized crime groups. The first commitment on border management was one of 4 commitments in our report that received a 100% compliance score, with each G7 member fully complying to the commitment, with actions such as expanding the capacity of border crossing locations and bilateral agreements with partner countries to improve cross-border information sharing. The second commitment on dismantling transnational crime received a compliance score of 88%. Scoring a +1 on this commitment also required members to address both migrant smuggling operations and human trafficking operations, as well as having significant action with international and regional partners. The members that received a +1 were France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and the US, with Canada and Japan receiving a 0. Thank you very much.